Freedom of speech requires one speaker at a time.
Sometimes the enforcement of rules for free speech merely disguise a desire to silence the speech.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, and I would also like to welcome you to today's program. As you heard from the opening statements, we have a very interesting and timely discussion, and I'm glad that you've tuned in today. Before we get started, I would like for you to meet our panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I am the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University in Michigan, which is affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm the senior minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Tony Matthews, and I serve as senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
And last, but hopefully not least, my name is Mel Robeck. I'm senior professor of church history and ecumenics at Fuller Theological Seminary, where I serve also the president as an ambassador for ecumenical relations. I'm also a minister with the Assemblies of God.
Thank you very much, each one of you. And no one is least or no one is last on this program, by the way. You're all number one in my book, at least. But thank you for being here, taking time out of your schedule for this discussion. On December the 10th, 2018, that marked the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti was invited to the University of Southern California to mark that important declaration. Mayor Garcetti began his speech, but almost immediately people in his audience began to heckle him. He attempted to respond to them, but they only grew more vocal as many of them broke into their rendition of "Santa Claus is Coming to Town." It became apparent that this was a well-orchestrated attempt to frustrate, embarrass, and ultimately to dismiss anything the mayor would say. In the end, he stopped speaking and left without finishing his speech. Those behind the disruption shouted their agenda, but were unwilling to allow the person who had the floor to speak. Today, I would like to ask our panelists to consider at least these three questions regarding this issue. First of all, is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights important? And if so, why? Second, when is it appropriate to limit freedom of speech, or as Article 19 in the Declaration notes, freedom of opinion and expression? And then finally, how should people of faith respond in the midst of such turmoil? We're going to go back to those who helped to begin today's program. For that, welcome back to the program, Bishop Olson. You're first, then we'll go over to Tom Plumley, who will also make further comments on his opening statement.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be back. I think freedom of speech requires also respect. And what the example that was given here is oftentimes really an act of disruption of somebody else's freedom of speech. And even so, one who's entrusted with the common good as a mayor in administering the government of a local city where it's important for the citizenry to hear him, if not to agree with him. And instead, this sort of anarchy was fostered in an attempt to disrupt that very thing and not even to further an agenda except anarchy. I think this is a current problem that we're facing. It's an old problem, but in current vestige with things like social media and greater and greater disrespect for the responsibility to speak well, but also just to exercise speech so that something can be heard and responded to with other speech and not just shouted down with noise.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Reverend Plumley, you also helped to start the program. More thoughts on your opening statement, please.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Bishop Olson. I agree. My problem is that I think there are slippery slopes on both sides of this hill. There is a great biblical precedent for being impertinent and untimely. We think of Amos's encounter with Amaziah, the priest, and the king's favorite prophet. He was regarded as impertinent and unwise and untimely. Isaiah, walked around the city naked. He was somewhat impertinent in that. Jeremiah was so untimely and unwise that he got himself thrown into a pit. Moses certainly was regarded by Pharaoh as supremely uncivil in his commentary on what was going on in Egypt at the time that he was trying to get the Hebrew people freed. Even more recently, folks far less holy than those that I just mentioned, some folks that we know as the Sons of Liberty in Boston. One could make a great case that the American Revolution would not have taken place without their impertinence and their impatience and their lack of civility. I'm informed in what I say by no less a voice than Martin Luther King Jr.'s. He encountered these very same concerns from a group of clergy who wrote to him when he was in Birmingham, Alabama, conducting a protest there, saying that he was being impertinent. He was unwise, and it wasn't a good time to be doing it. And he wrote in what we refer to now as the letter from the Birmingham jail, wrote one of the real masterpieces of American literature, I think, outlining how wait has almost always meant never, and how that sometimes, in order to correct injustice, we have to create spectacles. We have to make people uncomfortable. There are a lot of times when people are told that they're not the right people to be making the argument. They're not doing it in the right way. They're not being respectful enough. They're not doing it at the right time, and a lot of times that's just the way that the status quo is being enforced by sometimes people of goodwill, but people who don't recognize all of the dynamics of the situation.
All right, thank you very much, and for your participation today. Let's go down table. Dr. Matthews, welcome to the program. Your thoughts on this subject,
Good
please.
being here. I think this is a really interesting conversation, and I was intrigued when I heard the moderator's comments about the rendition of Santa Claus, because I love that song. So I decided.
Hope it didn't ruin it for you.
I decided when I read this, I decided to actually look and see what they were saying. These protesters, and they basically said, you better watch out, you better not cry. Eric Garcetti is telling us lies. Human rights violations happening now. So that was their rendition. And they were protesting homelessness, police brutality, and that caused a big stir. Second, as the Bishop said, is freedom of speech should be respected on all sides. I'm always disturbed when I see groups And a lot of these are young people who are out there, they're shouting other folks down, they won't let them talk. And if they're really concerned about homelessness and police brutality, that's not the way to get it done. There needs to be some other ways. So it was underwhelming to me, and I just think that we need some civility and to take different means. But Tom, of course, is correct as well. Sometimes, you know, the squeaky wagon gets the oil. So,
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Robeck, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you very
Your
much.
thoughts, please. You're welcome.
Yeah, well, I live close enough to the city where Eric Garcetti is the mayor. He's well liked by most people. And we have a huge problem with homelessness. As you might guess, I think we have something like 35,000 people on the streets in Los Angeles. We have another 3,500 in Pasadena, where I live. And there's no easy solution, especially when we have millions of dollars being given by the state of California to develop low-income housing. And everybody is saying, oh, but not in my neighborhood. And that is a huge issue. I don't think that's the government's fault. I think that's our fault as the people. So I was really disturbed, I think, when I saw this, because it seems to me that the Declaration on Human Rights is an incredibly important document. It was signed by every country in the world. Even though it's not lived up to by a lot of them in a lot of ways. You know, we do have slavery of different kinds. We do have the lack of respect for certain religions. We have, you know, there are just a whole range of violations. But for the United Nations in 1948 to come up with a document like this, I think it's extremely important that students today know about that document. And so to have the mayor invited to a major university where he's to give a speech explaining this thing and the importance of it for the contemporary society, and then to have these kids come along and say, he's lying, you know, because we have all these civil rights or all these human rights issues in Los Angeles. Yeah, we have human rights issues, and we keep working with them, and we keep working to overcome them. And police brutality is one of those things, and we've made enormous headway in that regard over the last 25 years. It's just really been amazing to me how much we've changed. But I just find this extremely difficult. But I find it very common for students to think, this is the way to get our answer. This is the way we go about doing business. And I think they need to learn a few lessons about civility and respect for the office and so forth.
Thank you very much. Let's come over to Canon Peterson. Canon Peterson, your thoughts on
Yes. Well, in many respects, last week's program, which was on civility, this is really the case statement this week in relationship to civility. And so I appreciate that we were able to think about this, and particularly in the relationship to the context of freedom of speech. I must say that Tom's litany of the prophets raised some really interesting points for me, particularly as we think about this. How does one get their point across in this type of a situation? The injustices, for example, that we find in the Hebrew scriptures that the prophets are discussing. And so the next point would be then, well, what's the difference between what the students were doing at USC in relationship to what the prophets had done? And just because the prophets are now canonized and are the saints of the church, maybe these kids in 1,500 years will be canons and saints of the church as well.
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Oh, Michael. I thought you'd issue their names for canonization.
I'll hedge my bets, but no.
But the issue, I think, the issue is well, how does one get attention? And how can Los Angeles grapple with their problems of homelessness? I mean, your statistic is just 35,000 a night out on the streets.
Yep.
Well, that's a mid-sized city in the United States, just outside. So I think that I agree with Michael when he said, it was nearly anarchy. Indeed, a situation like that when the mayor cannot be speaking at that very important event. But as the students have said in their interviews, this was really hypocrisy on the mayor's point to be invited to speak at USC, when we have this problem in our own city. So I think that you know, we are dealing with some really tough questions here. And how do we actually enable protests? How does Martin Luther King, whoever this new Martin Luther King is, deal with protests dealing with subjects like this?
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Luxton.
I'm going to kind of come in from a different angle. When I read this this program, I thought about Shakespeare. So why Shakespeare? So nothing Shakespeare said specifically, but the way Shakespeare was performed. Right? It was performed in a stage in the round, and people would stand, and they would come with their eggs and their everything else they wanted to in order to engage with the action. And if there was a villain on the stage and they didn't like it, they would be throwing stuff and they'd be shouting and they'd be engaging. And that was all part of the energy of the occasion. And I thought about that. I thought, so what made that work? What was different about it? First of all, it was an individual interacting with what was going on, and it was an interaction. And if they weren't listening, they wouldn't know where to throw the eggs. I mean, to put it bluntly.
To get it, yes.
the actual energy came in the fact that there was listening and there was response, and there was listening and there was response, and that was just part of what it was. So I kind of thought, well, is there something we could learn from that type of thing? And it seems to me that we want the freedom to speak, but we don't necessarily take the responsibility to listen quite so seriously. And it seems that on both sides here, not saying that the mayor was doing anything wrong, but I do think that we need to give people opportunity to speak and for us to listen, and expect the right to speak and others to listen. And however that is modulated or put together, I think to create an environment where people know they have, their voice can be heard here and here because they will be listened to, I think helps control this kind of event where people just heckle and want to shut everyone else down. And they too, they're not willing to listen. But they want to be heard. So how do we get that listening and speaking as both as responsibilities and rights together?
So not many things are learned when everyone is shouting and no one is listening.
That's correct. Everyone needs to be listening. Everyone needs to be listening.
We're going to come to Dr. Matthews and then over to Reverend Plumley.
When
Dr.
I see
Matthews.
these types of protests going on, and the protests are pretty. These folks are pretty mean. They're pretty. And some of them can be violent. I always ask myself, well, what type of home life do they have? I mean, I know parents cannot be responsible for what their children do. In fact, they're college-age kids. But wow, what's going on at home? I mean, my kids, when they were in college, if I saw them on television doing something like that, I'm going to talk with them. I'm going to have a nice little. Now they may not listen, but I'm going to have a pretty good talk with them, because it's just the civility of it is so. The optics is just bad. I just think it's just no excuse for people not to allow others to talk. And if you want to be heard, you have to give people an opportunity to speak. And again, this was centered around something the protesters wanted, the human rights declaration. It's so we got to take the emotions out and stick with the fact and the principles that are at hand.
All right, thank you, Reverend Plumley.
Thank you. Please, friends, don't mistake me as equating these Los Angeles protesters on this particular day with the greats of our scripture and of human history. They may or may not deserve to be mentioned in the same breath. It's just that I get real itchy when the powerful tend to complain about not being able to speak. And I think we need to pay attention to that. Now the other thing I wanted to say is we deal in this sort of issue all the time in whatever venue we work. I think whether it's in a school setting or whether it's in a local church, we have to learn. Sometimes we have to teach. Right. how to have a discussion about things that matter in a way that gets us someplace, in a way that's healthy. I think of John over there having sat in communication with leaders of churches across the world. You've got to have some agreed upon format in which we not only speak but allow others to speak. We speak and we listen.
Even if that includes eggs and cabbages and robins and potatoes,
probably didn't.
Probably not.
But in years past, probably did.
All right, thank you. We're out of time for this segment. It went by pretty quickly. There is an important announcement I'd like for you to stand by for. We'll be back for the summations in just a moment.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you. Welcome back, and I would like to encourage you to go to the website. You can learn about the Town Hall estates that Mark is talking about. Some people are very interested in that, and I think you'd find the page interesting about that. And then also there are some archive programs from times that we have been around this table before that you might be interested in tuning into. We're going to go to our summation statements just now. For that, we begin with Bishop Olson.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who exercised freedom of speech, did so in a spirit of also civil disobedience, which was both disobedient to the unjust laws at the time, but also civil, which prompted the tyrannical response of those in authority, instead of authority, just power. I think that we have to realize that in the prophetic voice we speak is not just simply to tear down for its own sake, but in a sense to preach God's desires for his people, which is unity and respect and basic human dignity. And that's the responsibility of the church.
Thank you. Now, Canon Peterson, your summation.
I think there is absolutely no doubt that the mayor's rights were violated. His freedom of speech was violated. The people who came to attend his speech on this very historical day were violated. And I also think that the demonstrators, what little value did they actually achieve in what they did and how they did it in that day? So I think that we really have, a point in which Michael has just made here about how one actually behaves and how one actually is able to do their thing. And I think the key word here is whether or not they were being prophetic.
Well, thank you. Dr. Matthews.
Three quick things. I think the way the protesters acted deserves timeout. They need to be put in timeout.
There you go.
And second, they need to be put in a civility class in college. Third, the Article 1 of the Declaration says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. A spirit of brotherhood, mutual respect. The sooner we learn that, the better we'll be.
Thank you, and thank you for the practical advice and counsel as well. Dr. Robeck, your summation.
Yes, I really like the last summation. It really sums up my feelings quite clearly. I do think the students were very much out of order who were protesting. I don't look at it in the same way that you look at it, Tom, where they're cutting people off, whereas the prophets are in a conversation back and forth with the king, whether the king likes it or not. I can remember times even in my own tradition, Pentecostal tradition, when we had eggs and cabbages and even rocks thrown through the windows, and then people would scurry off and so forth. So, you know, it's not, and it's not always in conversation. It's not always to make the point other than to say, I don't know, is this harassment or is this get out of town or, you know, what is it? It's not, anyway. I'm faced with something at home. In the city of Pasadena, we have a big homeless problem. And so the city has decided that if you have an apartment on your property, which we've just finishing building up what they call an ADU, an additional domestic unit for my son, who is disabled. And in order to get permits from the city, we had to do one of two things. We either had to pay them $20,000 for the right to build that, and if we rented it, we had to pay them $20,000 and they to keep it in the family, or we could rent to anybody on their list of who is there.
Okay.
Doesn't matter, no discrimination whatsoever. We ended up with a compromise of a $7,000 kind of payment and the signing of a covenant saying for 7 years we will not rent to outside the family.
Thank you. Time is flying. Just a few more moments here. Yes, Reverend Plumley.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're talking about a real key to community, and that's conversation that matters and conversation that is conducted in a way that's helpful. Anarchy is the very definition of destruction of community. And another thing that I think we need to mention that I'm not sure we've mentioned in this half hour is that the telling of truth is an absolute must in any sort of conversation.
Thank you. Dr. Luxton.
I follow. I'm going to say what they should be taught in the timeout. Listen, and how to listen, and then listen.
Very nicely done. And thank you, everyone. We've learned some things here today, I think, and I'm so glad that you've tuned in today for this program. Perhaps you can make a difference in whatever circles you might be having discussions and where you might be influencing. So thank you for tuning in today. We look forward to seeing you again real soon. For now, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. And so now, until next time, and next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.